I was born in 1926, which was approximately 3 years before the Great Depression. Now, when the Depression began in 1929, of course I don't remember it, but the economy just dropped out of the whole area. And some of my memories are of walking home from school down the hill and seeing all sorts of men standing in front of municipal offices demanding food and wanting help to pay their bills and to buy food, and it was an amazing time. I remember, well, I was about 6 or 7 when I was 6 when I started to school, and that is one of the most vivid memories of seeing hundreds of men on the main street demanding food stamps, or relief as it was called at that time. Now, my dad had a business which relied heavily on farmers and people like that for his business. He had blacksmithing and welding, so he was involved in both areas of his business. But with working with the farmers, he was very seldom paid in money. He was paid in wood and potatoes. We had potatoes and vegetables and honey, and cheese, which came in great wooden barrels with, remember, the cheesecloth on the top. And as far as transportation, well, we certainly didn't have a car until I was maybe 9 or 10 before we got our first car. But up until then, you walked. You walked everywhere. You walked to school. The only transportation we had really was sometimes the farmers would be going by with their sleighs, and we would jump on them, especially to go up the hill from the bridge. It was our mode of transportation. Some farmers were wonderful, let us drive. Others would yell at us to get off the sleighs, but other than that, we walked everywhere, and we certainly did not have the wonderful, look at the children now with their snowsuits and we had rubbery boots and handmade socks and mittens that were made of felt and embroidered, but they weren't, unless your mother was a knitter, you didn't have woolens. So I remember being cold, very cold, and even the house. We didn't have a furnace until I guess I was 10 or 12 when our house had a wood stove in the kitchen and a little heater wood stove in the living room with a pipe that went up through my parents' bedroom, and that was how we heated the house, and it was a 2-story house, so it was cold. I remember being cold in that era until we did get the furnace, and that changed things. So as far as playing, we played outside. My dad made us sleighs they had runners on them that we could steer them, and we had snowshoes. I remember those big old like tennis rackets, and then later we had skis, of course, just plain wooden slats that went on our boots. But went to the library, read books, went to people's houses. That's about it. We didn't have we did have a radio that was in the dining room, and that was I remember listening to all of these old things, Fibber McGee and Molly, but you listened to them unless there was a fight or a hockey game, and then that was the domain of the father who took over the radio, and the neighbors would come in because we had a radio, and they'd sit around and smoke and listen to Joe Louis and Max Schmeling and the Big Fighters. So that was our entertainment as a child. That was what we did.
Now your dad, Grandpa Cotter, was the blacksmith in Pembroke. Do you remember going down to the shop?
Oh, absolutely. I used to come down the hill. His first blacksmith's shop was on the same street. It was on, I think it was called Sussex Street, and it backed on the hotel, the Windsor Hotel. And then eventually he bought a large lot on John Street and built a new shop. But I remember the old shop, and there always seemed to be lots of horses around it. But then the new shop on John Street, I don't remember horses so much as welding and the sparks of the welders. And I had a little piece of wood, and I could put it in there. I used to go down and work on that and try to fashion things out of wood and wait for my dad to walk home up Maple Avenue to walk home with him. So that's my memories of the shop. I do remember the horses, and I think it was my father's social life, because there was always old farmers, and they were sitting around and smoking pipes and chit-chatting, and it was I guess you'd call it a man cave now. That was where the men liked to congregate.
Now, music's always been part of your life. How did you learn how to play music?
My mother was a fantastic piano player. I think she played, I had the Pembroke Standard Observers, I used to get them, and for years there wasn't a function that it wouldn't say piano music was provided by Mrs. J.J. Cotter at fashion shows, church things, and she had limited music training, but she had the gift of being able to play anything. And she started to teach me when I was like about 5. And I remember the first one she taught me was Around the Marble Arch, and it had 4 chords, and it was on E flat and B flat. And I can still play that, and I think there were just 2 chords. And I learned to play that. And then as I progressed, she would teach me more chords, like the C chords and the G chords and things like that. And then when I went to school, they had a music program, and I took lessons from this, 2 nuns, Sister Stanislaus and Sister Ethel, and they were cross, and I didn't always play the way it was written. I like to improvise, so I can remember having my knuckles cracked many times with a little ruler and told to play the way it was written. So I don't know if that was why I decided to play it my way. As an adult, I took music. I went to when I taught at St. Andrew's School. I took music lessons from Anne Foley, and I got up to grade 4. And again, my problem was not playing the way it was written. And I can remember one day she said to me, Mrs. Marcotte, Handel knew what he was doing when he wrote the Messiah. Now play it right. And I didn't go back. I liked my way just as well as Handel's.
All right.
So that was how I started my music, and I love it, and I have played when I was teaching. As soon as I walked into a school, I was designated to form a choir and sing it, get them to sing at all the celebrations. So in my retirement, I think in my little booklet, and one of them said that I filled the halls of the school board, the schools with music, which was my gift to education, help the kids to sing.
It's not a bad legacy. Now, you were always a teacher. You took some time off to raise kids, but you always taught. But you went to Teachers College at a very, very early age.
Very young.
Tell me about that.
Well, I went to Toronto Teachers College, and my first year of teaching, I lived again with the sisters on Bloor Street and Jarvis Street, which isn't a great reputable area at the time. We were very secluded and isolated and, under strict jurisdiction in Toronto. But my first teaching job then was in a one-room school in Mears Bay, which is outside of Chalk River, in a very remote area, and 3 miles away was another school, and Donna Keon was the teacher there. She had gone to Teachers College with me, and she lived in Sheenborough. And fortunately for me, she had a large family. Wilbur Keon was one of famous Dr. Keon, was one of the children, but she had an older brother, Clarence, and they had a taxi in Sheenborough, so he used to come up to pick Donna and I up on Friday nights and bring us home, and then drive us up again on Monday mornings, very early sometimes, or he would take us to the train. And I can remember getting off that train in Moor Lake, and the train would go off, and Donna and I would be left on the track as the train went away, and they always seemed to leave us about, it seemed to be a quarter of a mile where our car was. They never brought us to the station. And I remember walking up that track and hearing the wolves howling, and we were terrified. 2 kids, we were 17. But I was 17, well, that year I turned 18. But we would be frightened to death. And she was teaching right at Moor Lake Station, and then they would drive me to where I was staying 3 miles away. And there was every school seemed to be 3 miles from your destination. And now people laugh at me, but I had no other way of getting to school by walking. And I walked that distance on that highway every day, get to the school, and one of the old janitor across the road was supposed to put on a fire. Sometimes he did, sometimes it was freezing and cold in that place. So I think that's why now everybody complains at my house being hot. But I vowed I would never be cold again, because I seemed to be cold from the time I was a child until I was an adult. I was cold. So those are things that I think change your character or your disposition, and you don't really realize it at the time. So that's my youth, and so that's all I have to say about my early years.
Good memories?
Very good, yeah. A hard time. I mean, it wasn't easy. There was no money. I think my first salary was $92 a month when in Mears Bay, and out of that I had to pay $30 to the, I lived at Five Oaks Inn, and it was sort of a boarding place, and I paid $30 a month, and that left me with $60. There was no income tax or anything like that. But $60, I mean, I bought my first store-bought coat in the winter coat, because up to that I had never had one. They were always made by Mrs. Saja from somebody else's coat that had to be tailored to fit. Usually coats from things that were sent from my two wealthy aunts in Kirkland Lake who were married to mining engineers, and they had, so we used to get boxes, and I'd have the coats. We'd have, Elaine and I always had left hand-me-downs. So I bought my first coat. I remember it was moss green with a muskrat collar, and it was not very practical, but very stylish.
I want you to tell one story before we shut her down today, is tell about, you had a bit of an Ottawa Valley accent when you went to Teachers College. And,
I did. And I still have one, I would think. I've been told I do have a bit of a Valley accent, but there was a Mr. Kendrick. I've never forgiven him. I was so young, and he asked me to read something, and I said, "The cows ran around the town." And he said, "Excuse me, would you repeat that?" I said, "The cows ran around the town." And he said, "And where do you come from?" And I said, "From the Ottawa Valley." "Well," he said, "I am going to teach you, before you go back to Pembroke, how to talk. Now drop your jaw and say, 'The cows went around the town.'" So I tried it, but it just didn't work. And I thought afterwards, if I had ever gone back to Pembroke and said, "I'm going downtown," they would have probably sent me for an observation for lockjaw or something. So that was my first big experience in Toronto, the big city. Oh, it was something else. Streetcars and incredible. So it was an experience.
Now that's perfect.
Is it?
That was great.
Now let me hear it.